Good evening, everyone. The intention for this second panel is really that I want it to be a policy discussion. We've just heard about the importance of funding quality content. I know many in this room also care about online safety, and there's regulation that is coming down the pipe, and we will be talking about that as well. So really, what I hope to get from this discussion is what are advertisers, media owners, agencies, lawmakers, what should they be doing to address the issue of online harms? It's a highly salient topic. We just saw violence in Belfast this week, which was stoked by incendiary rhetoric online. The Times and others, now Politico, I just heard just within the past hour or two, reporting that a ban on social media for under 16s is apparently imminent. That news could break any day, could even break while we're talking on stage just now. So it's clear that action regulation is coming, and this panel is eminently qualified to discuss some of the policy implications, other interventions that could be coming that have implications for advertisers and other media owners. So I'd like to welcome up onto the stage, and again, we can do it in like the UFC or style that Omar did, so maybe perhaps one at a time, but I'll go a bit faster, I think. No, sorry, no disrespect to my former boss. Jake Dubbins is the co-founder of the Conscious Advertising Network and managing director at independent media agency Media Bounty. Big claps. Cosima Wiltshire is an undergraduate research fellow at UCL. She's a youth advisor to UNICEF and also a strategy and public affairs lead at youth-led digital wellness nonprofit FlipGen. And also trying to show up all of us, apparently, because when I was 20, I was just probably getting drunk somewhere. Andy Burrows is the CEO of the Molly Rose Foundation, the charity that was set up following the death of Molly Russell in 2017. A coroner ruled that was in part caused by her social media use and what was served to her algorithmically via her social media use. Yes, please. And finally, Lexi Kirkconnell-Kawana is the CEO of the independent press regulator, Impress. Thank you all so much for being here. So, as I mentioned, regulation is coming, and before we get into the deep policy discussion that I'd like to have, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the moral and the business cases for even being here and talking about the importance of online safety. If we could start, Andy, what is the moral case for this upswell that we're seeing in political and business pressure to regulate the platforms?
Well, look, the reality is that we've had over a decade of social media and other parts of the stack causing harm to children and young people, and indeed to society at large, as a result of commercial decisions and business models translating into design choices that have had safeguarding really as a second-tier concern, if that. So, you know, if we go back to Molly's death 8 years ago, we know that she was served 2,000 pieces of content, probably actually an order of magnitude several times that, on Instagram in the 6 months before she died, covering, you know, the most appalling types of materials: suicide content, self-harm material, influencer-type content, glamorizing and normalizing intense depression. We know 8 years later that if you go onto Instagram, if you go onto TikTok, that content is still there, and it is still there on steroids. And we'll be, you know, releasing research this weekend that shows the Online Safety Act has made barely any difference in terms of the level of exposure. And those of you who have teenage children in the audience here, there is probably a 50-50 chance that your teenage girl has seen suicide, self-harm, eating disorder, or depression content in the previous week. That is not something that we should be tolerating.
Mm. I look forward to seeing that research. Cosima, you were sort of the same generation. I'm technically Gen Z. You are deep into it. What has growing up in this media environment been like for you and your peers?
Yeah, I think it's definitely challenging. I was the generation, I was 13 when COVID happened, and so suddenly we were like tunneled into this echo chamber of short form content. It's kind of when it started to become a massive thing, and kind of overnight we had no other way of socializing or seeing how the world works, and it was like right as we were developing. So you can kind of imagine how that might have played out as a 13-year-old girl. I think now, and for the past few years, we've kind of seen the standards placed, especially on girls, but also on boys, just in different ways. The standards kind of shift and shrink progressively every day, whilst sort of, and we kind of felt made to feel like we have to be perfect, but perfect is constantly changing, and that's just echoed and consistently pushed toward you on social media. I don't think, if it wasn't on social media, it would be somewhere else, but it's kind of the volume and speed at which you see it is really disturbing. And I spend a lot of time on the ground with kids across London and also kind of beyond and internationally. And it's not something that's slowing down, but it's something that has to change, because technology can, in an ideal world, really benefit kids. It can equalize things, it can democratize things, but we can't get to any of those benefits if this veil of harm is just getting thicker and thicker. And somehow to kind of reach those good parts, it shouldn't be that like a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old, because under any law, a 16-year-old is still a child, should have to kind of wade through this massive amount of harm or fight their own brains to be able to get off their phones so they can do their work. It just shouldn't be this difficult. So yeah, I would say it was hard when I was younger. I wouldn't want to be 13 today, kind of as things stand. But I am optimistic that it can get better, because I've worked with stakeholders kind of across the board, and I know that they can do it if we play it right. So yeah.
So much of the harm is driven by the business case that these businesses have. And Jake, I know you've spoken about this in great detail. Why are the platforms acting this way, number one? And number two, why should advertisers, people in this room, care about reforming online safety when, in some ways, dare I say, advertisers have been the beneficiary of people spending more time on platforms where their ads get served?
Yeah, I mean, the business model is very clear. We used to talk about the attention economy. You know, with the court case in the US, it is arguably the addiction economy, insofar that the more that we are on these devices, the more advertising can be served to us, the more money these tech platforms can make. So it is a pure profit motive. As Andy said, the Online Safety Act seems to have made very little difference, and the sort of incentive structures to make that sort of money from legal but harmful content, you know, it's the profit motive. Before, a year before Molly Russell took her own life, there are now unsealed documents from the US court case that say, you know, the company-wide goal was total teen time spent. So the corporate goal of a big tech platform was to keep our teenagers on that platform for as long as possible so they can make more money. You know, that's internal documents. I think the other thing now, and we talked about, you know, the moral case, you know, if you give a shit about your kids, if you give a shit about your community, if you give a shit about the environment in which you live, this should matter to us all. We pulled, over the last couple of days, some of the tweets going on. You mentioned Belfast in your opening statement, and some of these tweets, for example, and I'll read them out, and I'm sorry if this is triggering to anybody in the room, but one of them: race is the issue, not immigration status. Why would Reform use gross N-word music in a campaign ad? Immigrants getting burned out in Belfast. There's the video of that happening. And then underneath, as we root out the cancer, remember the Jews who started all this. And on the day of the start of the Football World Cup, the Men's Football World Cup, it says, next to a picture of Bukayo Saka, if you look like this, you are not English. Next to that is a Google ad saying, be a top England fan. And so the quality of our media, as Samira, you know, pointed out, you know, are these effective places to advertise? Is that, you know, is that a brand safe environment? What would Google's staff globally think of where those ads are popping up? in that. So that the point of that is that garners attention, that outrage, that it's very, very clear that drives eyeballs, and unless brands know exactly where their ads are appearing, they are blind, or they don't have the mandatory legislation to do so. And just finally on the business case, I mean, Samira made the point, I think it's utterly crazy that brands and businesses are not listening to Samira, and the very clear evidence from lots of studies all over the place to say, actually, if you care about where your ads turn up and with quality attention, voluntary attention rather than involuntary 0.2, seconds, then you might sell more toothpaste rather than driving down a CPM. What's the actual objective of that business? Is it to drive down CPMs or sell more toothpaste?
Has industry self-regulation failed, and also has the industry been captured by special interests? I think it's a common question that I hear a lot and doesn't get raised perhaps as much as it is. There was a lot of complaints about certain industry events that platforms got to speak at and were not necessarily questioned in the way that at least I as a journalist would like to question them. Lexi, I know you have a view on this. Is the industry doing a good enough job of policing itself, and are advertisers doing a good enough job of advocating for better quality media?
Well, so I have the benefit, I work as a press regulator now. I also used to work in advertising regulation. So I've seen inside the tent of the self-regulatory system for advertising. I know very well the limits of that system in terms of how advertisers and industry behave. And then obviously we all know how the platforms has behaved as an industry when it comes to checks and balances, trust and safety and compliance. And the fact is, advertising regulation is not set up at all to address this. It has a bare content regulation function that has no enforcement backstops and requires industry consensus to keep the regulator functioning and its associated bodies. And what's been really interesting about this conversation is that regulation itself of the advertising industry is not going to go anywhere near touching the sides of this issue. So in terms of reform for the advertising sector, it needs an overhaul if it wants to take this issue seriously, and Cannes issued a really positive platform on what sort of policy changes might need to happen across the advertising industry to start to address this. So does advertising self-regulation meet the moment? Absolutely not. That's just the short answer. On the platform side, I find it really interesting when Cosima talks about her experience. When I was a 15-year-old, Facebook had just become publicly listed, and this is like really back in the day, the Wild West of the first iterations of social media. And back then they were arguing, we are not content or editorial, we are just distributors, we are sort of open source, etc. That was 20 years ago. So when we're talking about like the amount of time this industry's had to clean up its act, institute real controls, come together collectively to build brand safe environments for everyone. They've had 20 years to do that, and even now we've got new statutory regulation in the form of the Online Safety Act. None of it has come into effect and force because Ofcom has spent 2 years writing codes that have been heavily influenced obviously by the industry itself as well. And so how far away are we from seeing enforcement of those codes? Probably years again. And so we're talking about like a very, very long-standing time for which these platforms have had the opportunity to do and create the right interventions and just won't, like every opportunity. I remember back in 2017, Meta had created its oversight board. They had, a really, really robust trust and safety and compliance team. Circa 2021, like 4,000 jobs are lost in that team area. X's team totally cut. They don't even have a trust and safety lead anymore. I think the most recent one resigned like 6 months ago. Like that's the nature of these companies' like, level of intervention here. Where they do have really robust teams are in their legal departments, who litigate extensively to stop regulations that are coming into effect. Now, in Europe, where they've got the Digital Services Act, their kind of equivalent of online safety, some of these platforms have taken like multi-party suits against the regulators themselves when the regulation only came into effect last year. Like, that's their response to this. This climate is
Lawfare
to resist regulation. That's where these companies stand on trust and safety.
Lexi and Andy, you've both now said that the Online Safety Act is not necessarily fit for purpose. Fair to characterize your yes, nodding. What's needed and can it be done quickly? Lexi, you say we're a couple of years away from legitimate, helpful regulation. Do we need a new law? Do we need a reform for that law? And how fast can that move, Andy?
Look, it's been very, very clear that the Online Safety Act that was passed under the previous government was watered down. It wasn't fit for purpose. It isn't commensurate to the size of some of the largest, most cash-rich companies in the world. The incentives are not there to drive the meaningful cultural change in platform and to start to change the business models. I think one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating is speaking to Labour in opposition. It was very clear they understood the problems. They saw the gaps in the Online Safety Act. And then we have seen 2 years of this government being captured by the tech bros.
What do you think has changed? What's causing that?
I think it's that we've had a government that has been desperately prioritising growth and has, bought the Kool-Aid in terms of, as Damien was saying in the previous session, the idea that if we place basic safeguarding obligations on these companies, that will, minimise the amount of data sheds that we get up the M1. Look, I think we're now at an inflection point. We can fix this. We could see legislation that strengthens the Online Safety Act, that sees the UK, along with other companies like Canada, like Spain, that are willing to take a stand, even though the geopolitics are complicated, and we could fix this legislation, which is what I think the vast majority of the electorate wants. I fear that we are actually then going to see, certainly in respect of children, measures that actually, if we see a ban announced next week, which is, frankly, a muddled and incoherent set of proposals from the Prime Minister that doesn't attract the confidence of civil society in the child safety sector, never mind not being supported by the evidence, what that effectively does is, at best, chill the Online Safety Act, if not kill it stone dead. And so, we're at the cusp of we could do something that fixes this. I fear we're going down the road where actually we will be set back years.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that everyone on the panel is against the ban. Is that true? Nodding? Yes?
Yeah, and for different reasons, right?
Okay.
Because let's talk about what the effect of a ban could be. We've got the Australian model and the experience now. They've had their ban in effect for about 8-9 months. All the evidence that's coming out of Australia now is 60% of children are evading the ban. Of the 40% that are compliant, they are seeing no positive benefits. They're not self-reporting any benefits from the ban in terms of their experience online. And I think where we kind of have a bit of unison on this issue is how is this preparing young people for their experience of being an adult on the social media in due course, right? The whole point of the Online Safety Act that I have a rub against is that when we talk about the watering down of the Act only addresses harm to children, right? It doesn't address harm to adults. So it doesn't address election interference. It doesn't address mis and disinformation. It doesn't address content that is harmful for adults. And people don't want to go there because they don't want to have the free speech debate, right? Everyone's terrified of curtailing, chilling free speech. But what that means is that in terms of the robustness of the Act, what we're saying to children is we're going to have some measures in place for if you are between 16 and 18 to reduce harm. But once you're an adult, free for all. You just have to deal with this extremely harmful, totally risky environment without any safeguards because we're not willing to do the hard work and figure out where the limits on speech might be to address the power of these platforms overall. And in terms of setting kids up for failure,
Yeah.
that's the real risk.
I think as well, like sort of supporting your point, but from like the perspective of talking to like young people. In April, I hosted a big town hall with young people from across the country and asked them basically what is happening, what is your ideal digital future, like what do you actually want from the internet and AI, and who do you think has a role to play in getting us there? And I asked these kids, like, what does it feel like to be online today? Do you feel in control? And it was stunning because I had kids from 9 to 25, and the pattern we found was that as you got older, they felt less in control and at risk to more harm than they did when they were 9. So I had 9 and 10-year-olds saying, well, yeah, I do online gaming, maybe a few hours a day. It turned out that only children felt a bit more in control because they had attention of their parents. Those with siblings, the older ones, they said that they have on Roblox and whatever for hours a day. However, once we spoke to the 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, so kind of looking past this obligatory 16-year-old age situation, they felt massively out of control. They felt anecdotally addicted to these products and incredibly anxious and scared and whatever else it might be. And they said that as they had got older, it had got worse. So for me, when you then combine that with the more quantitative data, I work very closely with UNICEF, and they found that 15 and 16-year-olds see sexual abuse content at twice the rate that younger children do, if not more. It's not acceptable. At present, we see 13-year-olds treated as adults in terms of online safety. How is 16 any better? I last year fell down the whole of online harm. I was 19, and I work in this, and I live and breathe it, and I know better, and I still fell down the trap of eating disorder content, and I know how to get out of it. So what on earth is it doing to younger children? We know. So we just need to do better. For me, the ban, no ban argument is not a great framing of the whole issue. It's become very polarized. I don't think it's super productive, as we probably have seen in the press. For me, the not ban end of things isn't a weaker option. It's going further. It's saying we want more. We want it to be intrinsically safer for everyone, no matter how old you are, so that you protect those under 16 and make it safer for them so they get their childhood, which is their right. But similarly, as you turn 16 and you're in the middle of your GCSEs, taking 25 exams in the space of 2 months, under so much stress that you're not suddenly turfed out onto Instagram or whatever else it might be as it stands. If we're agreeing that it's so desperately horrific, not saying myself, but if we're all saying it's so awful that we need to ban it for under 16s, how does that suddenly become acceptable with a birthday? Like, it just doesn't make sense, to me at least.
Sounded like the government was trying to shut you up with the helicopter. Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a personal answer to this and then a broader answer to this. I've got a 14-year-old boy, 11-year-old girl. They are not on social media. My older boy now does have a phone. Obviously, the stuff that I do means that I talk about the business model behind it, and I have, to their probably boredom, explained to them about what it's for and how it works and who's making the money and where the money goes and what the business model is. So I think that these things are so dangerous and so addictive that as a parent and as a dad, we've had those sorts of conversations, and my son now says, no, I don't want that. I do not want that at all. He might in the future, but that's for him. But I think I completely agree with what Cosimo was saying. Is like, we need to fix this for everyone. It's like, you know, it's not just children that can be in super vulnerable places, right? You know, it's not just, you know, the sort of suicide and self-harm content that Molly saw, extreme depression. You know, the violence online now, the kind of, you know, if you saw that in a film, it would be 18 plus at least. And so that's the other thing that we're all being exposed to on these platforms. And again, for what? For our attention, for our eyeballs to make a shit ton of money that is then exported from this country away from, you know, the Byline Times, for example, into America. You know, we're just exporting this industry.
I think a general question that's worth asking is it a win for the platforms to be forced to comply with a ban for a specific age group as opposed to having to redesign their platforms to be less addictive
Yes.
or harmful for everyone. And I will get onto that. Before that, just because I recognize that actually the ban is contentious. Just as a show of hands, is anyone, if you're willing, are you pro-ban? Raise your hand. Couple. Some eh. Does anyone want to share their view very quickly? James from Movement for an Open Web.
Changes the narrative, so it gets everyone talking about it, which is a good thing, but it mustn't be an end for all the reasons the panel have said. So I think it could be useful if all these voices lean in and explain why it's not good enough.
Okay, that's very fair. I see Jess Butcher in the back corner.
Over here as well.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Yes, obviously over 80% of parents support the ban, so we don't have a very representative sample of opinion on this, and indeed a proportion, 53% of 18 to 25-year-olds actually support the ban, which is staggering data from those that have just come out of that age group. I think parents are calling out for this because the norms need to change. And I do believe, with everything the panel is saying about this not being an end point, this is the beginning of a conversation. And it's merely a way to protect children whilst their brains are so young and impressionable. We can't turn the taps off forever. We also need to address the harmful nature and the addictive nature of these platforms and the liability for misinformation and disinformation. All of the conversations that we had in the previous panel are absolutely critical, but the norms need to change and the precautionary principle, I believe, needs to apply. And I also think the only way to exert pressure on big tech is to turn the financial taps off. You turn the financial taps off, and that's what's going to make them look at their design. That's what's going to make them look at how they can improve these platforms so that they can get that audience back in at an earlier age again. Because right now, our kids are guinea pigs, and they're being thrown the most sophisticated weapons-grade behavioural science that's ever been invented. And parents cannot manage that. And we're calling out for some support, and the law would give us that protection to say, no, you can't have it. You can't have it, it's not safe.
Thank you, Jeff.
Can I just quickly jump in there? Because I think one thing, and let's not kind of start throwing stats at each other, but I think when you ask, do parents support a ban? Do they support stronger regulation? Do they support stronger parental controls? You find actually that the majority of parents are saying yes to everything. And I think what that says is that parents are crying out for this to be fixed, not actually most parents crying out for a particular solution. And in fact, when you test a ban against a range of other measures, a ban loses every time. But I think, yes, there's a conversation to be had about, do we achieve a cultural reset? And is that worth, kind of what a transition might look like? But I think, what's really important to remember is that if 60% of kids are going to be on these platforms, and that is what all of the data from Australia is showing, and we are then saying to the companies, you don't have to focus on safety by design. That means that, the algorithmic harm, which cost Molly Russell's life 8 years ago, goes on unchecked. So we can feel better that this is a ban, that this is problem solved, but we are not telling the companies to address the safety by design choices. And we are then putting barriers in the way of children disclosing harm. And so, when we think about child sexual abuse, for example, and we know how hard it is for children to be able to disclose the abuse that they suffer, if we put barriers in the way of children being able to disclose, then, vulnerable children may well be at more risk. So we should have the conversation, but we have to be very, very clear about what the limits of a ban will be and what the very, very real unintended consequences will be.
And my concern about all of this as well is where we're going in terms of the underlying models of these platforms, right? Which is, we're saying, all right, it's so addictive, it's so harmful, we're not going to allow children to use it. But adults, fine, fair game, right? Like, it's treating these products, I feel, like the tobacco industry or the alcohol industry, and saying, within your discretion, within your limits, like, you can use this product as an adult because you're conscious and critical and you've got your own faculties and autonomy to use this product, right? Whereas it's a completely different product to any type of other harmful product we've seen before. Again, because these are the biggest companies in the world. They've thrown incredible amounts of data at designing these in such a way that it continues to enable them to create profit for themselves. And the fact is that, again, this is kind of unprecedented in terms of changing people's behaviour, changing the way that people's brains function. And it's sort of like saying, okay, unless we saw like mass death, like we would see cancer rates in the tobacco industry or in the alcohol industry, we're not going to intervene here when it comes to adults. And so we're not going to actually change the design of their systems or tap into the financial bottom lines to cause them to effectively incorporate safety by design. And that's my concern about this like really intensive focus on children, on bans, is we're not actually considering what this product is, what harm it might be doing to us all existentially, and how then we want to, as a public, as a collective, have these companies accountable to the way they affect us all as adults. I don't know, again, we could do a show of hands. How many people feel that they are addicted to their social media, to doom scrolling, to engaging? It's like it comes from a place of shame for a lot of people sometimes to talk about their relationship to these products. And the fact is that, if we only talk about it in the context of children and we don't look at the evidence of harm, then we're not going to be able to address safety by design for these companies overall in the long term.
Just also very quickly, and what's coming, and I'd be really interested to know, ban or no ban, is what the government is going to do with the LLMs as well, because obviously, you've got ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, others, but ChatGPT is used by, and I can't remember the actual stats, I'm not going to repeat it, by lots and lots of people, let's say, look it up, for therapy, And there is evidence that suggests that people have been led to self-harm and also commit atrocities on those platforms as well. So again, and guess what? OpenAI currently, you can have an account when you're 13, and ads are now coming to OpenAI in the UK. Now it was happening in the US, UK, South Korea, and Japan. So again, what is going to be the incentive structures of a large language model chatbot when money and advertising are the revenue stream? It'll be attention. It'll be attention. It'll be, how do I keep this person, 13, 28, 47, whatever, on this asking infinite prompts unless the design is regulated? So we will talk about infinite scroll. I'm sure pretty soon we'll be talking about infinite prompts.
I want to talk about safety by design policy. I appreciate that everyone's got an opinion on the ban, and I want to do the thing actually that Cosmo suggested and try and push back the ban, just have debating the ban for the rest of our time here. But I appreciate, please have those discussions outside the room with each other. I think it's great to stimulate that. You are all in favor of a safety by design approach. I want specifics on literally what design changes do you want to see? Do you think would be effective? Is it, excuse me, I have a list here, banning infinite scroll? Is it banning default For You feeds? Is it requiring greater transparency and user control over your algorithm? And same thing for advertisers. I would imagine that would be on the list as well. Is it due prominence for PSBs? We just heard that in the last panel. Cosmo, I actually want to start with you. I want your opinion. What do young people, and I appreciate all people are important, yes, Lexi, but what do young people want to see?
Yeah, I think that, I spend a lot of time trying to think like what actually does safety by design mean, because it is kind of a buzzword, but it is important. We just have to kind of define it and get that scope. It's not an exhaustive list, but in both my research with FlipGen, which is the organisation that I'm a director of, and also with UNICEF, we've come up with different ideas. And from the young people that we spoke to in April, there was all kinds of things. I think a really big one is those features and functionalities, because the whole addiction argument hadn't been something I had considered really until maybe a year and a half ago. I'd always been focused on the harm and the content because that's what I had experienced, and that was my version of growing up with social media. And then I kind of started talking to people and understanding that, my gosh, we're spending so much time on these things, and for me, it's more the fact that when I talk to kids about how they feel after spending 7 hours scrolling on Instagram or whatever equivalent platform, that they feel sad and they feel mad and they feel anxious and they feel scared. And so that's where it comes from for me, for wanting to look at those features. And I think it's probably the same for adults, maybe just slightly less extreme. So the specific features-wise, I think it's very basic things such as the fact that on a lot of platforms, the clock is blocked out. You can't see how much time has passed when you've been on these things for a lot of the time. The auto scroll, the fact that the feeds just don't end anymore. They used to run out of stuff to look at. You don't anymore. So there's no natural end point, even if you wanted one. You have to force yourself to get off of something that's designed to keep you on. I think things like just the way that it's not it's not like a safety by design feature. I don't know what it would come under, but the fact that you are able to be pushed content that is identified or like ambiguously still harmful content, the fact that I get like pushed stuff to eat 200 calories a day still every day on TikTok or whatever other platform it might be, like that just shouldn't be a thing. But I think it's about making sure that these platforms or products, because they are products, like any other product, is treated like one. There is safety. The fact that we've got to a place where we call them platforms, we don't call them products and services. They're products and services. Like every other thing has to be proven to be safe before it's deployed. So I see where the ban rhetoric comes in there, but it's out now. Like the beast has been unleashed and AI is the next one. So we've kind of got to deal with the real world. And so, yeah, I'm sure you guys have more specific features and functionalities, but in my ideal world, it would be a situation where we have autonomy again, where these various features, whatever we identify as the list, to a certain age, they get capped. So say if 16 is the age, we say that infinite scroll, et cetera, is banned for under 16s. And then for me, I would say from 16 to at least 21 to get you through uni when you're in education and you need to not be addicted to your phone, those things should be able to be toggled off. That would be my approach, but I'm sure you guys have better ideas.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, look, I mean, if I could do one thing, I would look to introduce a conditional ban on personalised algorithms. And what I mean by that is that if you want to serve algorithms to young people, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it for adults as well, because I think we should, then, if you want to offer personalised algorithms, there are strict conditions that you have to meet. So, number one, you are not serving harmful content, period. Not the kind of watered down, nebulous regulatory rules that we've got now. You're just not doing it. Number two, you're offering diversity of content, because I think, all the evidence shows it's not healthy for children or any of us to be bombarded with particular types of material. So there should be a diversity of content. And then, Jack, you mentioned, the kind of the must carry requirements. We think that absolutely should be a part of this. So we're not just, focusing on tackling away, mitigating harmful content, but actually saying, can we have online experiences that actually are nourishing and age appropriate? So that should mean, high quality content from public broadcasters, CBBC material. It should mean trusted mental health advice. It should mean, high quality content, so that actually, if the condition of having personalised algorithms is that then that is also interspersed with high quality content, and content that can help to be giving young people the kind of high quality experience. I think, kind of like the toothpaste is not going back in the tube, and, the issue about agency and autonomy is really important, because we hear it so often, don't we, that young people feel trapped. They feel kind of unable to exercise any control over what they're being shown. One of the things that really sticks in my head is a comment from a boy who I think was about 13 or 14 years old, who had posted underneath a video promoting self-harm content, and that said, I wish the algorithm would stop serving me this stuff. I'm seeing more of it, so I guess that means I'm not right in the head. And it just, appalling, but I think it just speaks to, the lack of agency, the lack of control. For kids that are online, this is a part of their lives, but they have no agency, no control. It shouldn't be the case. And if you look at, say, the DSA, where the option is you can reset your feed full stop, or you tolerate the status quo, it should be that you should be able to, toggle off the topics with ease. You should be able to, offer, on a piece of content, piece by content basis, the feedback. Do you want to see more? Do you want to see less? In a really simple way, so that we can be giving young people, yes, but also adults, a greater sense of control.
Jake, you've written a list on your notepad.
I think
Wish list.
dare I repeat a phrase that all of us were sick of a while ago, but that point of take back control is for individuals, yes, but also for advertisers as well. And I think advertisers have next to zero control of where their ads are popping up on these platforms. I think that, and that demands transparency. So I would have a mandatory transparency of a supply chain, not act, but included within any legislation. Most supply chains are well regulated. You can imagine your clothing brand, you'll know where that is made, you'll know what factory it is made and where it comes from, whereas this supply chain is totally opaque. So those posts that I read earlier, there is plenty more across YouTube and X that we've had a look at with other very, very big brands that if they knew, they would not choose to be next to that at all, but they don't. And so getting access to that supply chain is incredibly difficult, even for mega brands. Even when they ask, agencies will go, we'll come back to you. And then 3 months later, there is no answer. And so I think that mandatory object-level transparency of hashtags, channels, feeds, creators, where are my ads appearing, and then a proper audit of that, means that you can get around the freedom of expression argument, because if Google still want to monetize, the Bukayo Saka comment openly, and NGOs can take a look at that and their brand teams can take a look at that, and the decision is, I want to monetize racism, thank you very much. Well, they're not going to do that. But we don't have that sort of object level transparency in the supply chain. The other final thing I'll say very quickly is, we talked about the must carry stuff. They should bloody pay for it as well. This whole sector, social media first, now the AI companies have basically committed the biggest heist of human creativity the world has ever seen, for free, pretty much. They've put their training data across, artists, creatives, novels, everything, and they haven't paid for it. They should be paying for that quality content that appears within a Gen I model or indeed a social media feed.
It's a great point. As a journalist, I would like to get paid more.
You should be.
And
you should be paid for your original content and your IP.
You can tell the folks at Ad Wanted. You mentioned big brands caring, presumably, a great deal about where they show up. I raise it as a concern because I don't know if the platforms necessarily care that much about the big. Well, this is. Platforms are not necessarily being nudged by advertisers in the same way that they might have, a big media owner might have 50 years ago. Most of their business is from the long tail, and that presents a massive collective action problem. Do you have any advice? Does there need to be an ISBA for SMEs? I think, Omar, you've actually written about that, so I'm stealing that from you. What needs to be done in order to get the advertisers on board in a way that platforms listen to them?
Omar should be the CEO of the new ISBA for SMEs, maybe. But I think again, it goes back to transparency. If, for example, this is a bubble in here. We all understand this very much. Your local coffee shop advertising on Instagram, A, does not, and B, is not also listening to Ipsos and reports of effectiveness either, right? So I think there is probably a comms job that if there was transparency through the entire supply chain and local coffee shops were going, shit, am I next to racist content as well? And they could see that because it's easy to access and they have a choice, I think they'd be also, you know, making those sorts of different decisions. I also think that this effectiveness thing, again, blows my mind that brands big and small are going, yeah, what's the least effective media that I'll do that then.
The question is especially for like a mom and pop, would be what's easiest and what gets me sales. And I'm not actually a professional marketer, so I don't know any of what you've just told me, and I don't understand the language probably.
Yes, but I also think there should be probably like warning labels. So in the same way that, you know, cigarettes, for example, your content could pop up on this sort of stuff potentially.
And I just want to return to this point because what's really interesting, so we are working with a big collective of publishers right now to look at using the competition and markets consumer framework to enable publishers to negotiate effectively for being paid for their content, giving that value exchange fair and right? What I find really interesting about the advertising industry, including the long tail of SMEs, is they haven't looked at this issue through like a competition lens from the perspective of advertisers, right? You've got Google, who has 90% of ad share market and 90% of 30% of placement market, and advertisers are just kind of like, fine. It's like, this is a massive monopoly problem, and advertisers should collectively be getting together and going, hang on, this is not good enough, that I only have 1 or 2 suppliers in the market that I can go to. This is a competition law problem, and we should be using competition law frameworks to break up these companies and enable more suppliers to enter the space so that we can, as a supply chain, have effective competition to enable us to be, served better options and choices in this market, right? And so what I would love to see is the advertising associations, is the collectives coming together and looking at this through a new perspective, which is that it's a huge problem for you if you only have 2 places you can go for low effective, but nevertheless this ad buying market, right? You should be able to have a diverse range of players you can go to here. So I found it really interesting that this new competition framework's been in place now for 2 years, and I haven't heard any advertisers talking about trying to utilize it as a way to break up the sector and get better results for yourselves. And that could be across, from direct advertisers to media buying agencies, et cetera, and there's an opportunity for you to work together collectively to do that, because that's what we're doing in the publishing industry, to try and get a fairer deal from these platforms in the long term. And that's the thing about these companies, like I was just saying in the break, the way we treat them is as these inevitabilities. We've never seen companies this big, this size, this effective before, but the world operated in its own weird and wonderful way before Google, and it will exist after Google, right? And I think where we're losing sight of is applying the norms and laws and regulations we've had for a long time in this space as well, right? So when we talk about systems regulation and content regulation, we've done it before for traditional media, for broadcasters, for publishers. We know that it works. We see really high compliance rates with our standards code amongst our publishing body. Ofcom has worked really effectively with the industry for the last 30 years, the same in the broadcast sector. We can make this thing work. It's about political will and courage. And as you say, it's a collective action issue, but these associations exist. So why isn't the advocacy happening in the organisations to take on this power, take back control, when we've got these existing laws and frameworks and regulations in place to do it?
Well, the trade bodies there's definitely been accusations thrown around even earlier today, so I'll leave that there. I'm conscious of time. I want to look ahead a little bit deeper into the future. I mean, Ofcom has a new chair, first of all, Ian Cheshire. The political window of opportunity is upon us, clearly, because there may be a ban any day. Say you get everything you want on the wish list that we've sort of discussed in terms of safety by design. Maybe that includes some form of a ban or bans with caveats for certain features, let's say. What is the ideal we should be striving for in a post-platform dominated world? What does the next era, Lexi, that you're sort of referring to, what does it even look like? What do we want it to look like? And Lexi, why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really about where we've seen power sort of concentrate in other sectors before, and what that leads to in terms of outcomes for public interest, for public benefit. We know it doesn't work when it's all working towards monopoly, and it's all working towards captured interests, and it's all working towards profit, right? we need to work on how we can create better diversity amongst these players, right? We need alternative models of search, social, and AI and agentic, whatever's coming down the line, that allows for a plural market to exist where there's genuine choice and genuine user empowerment. When I think about, one of the biggest issues I have with platforms now is how, as a consumer, you just have to accept the terms of service. And Ofcom's going to look at that and go, maybe you should adjust the terms this way or the other to make them, safer for consumers. But ultimately, I have no power as a consumer to negotiate with my provider for the terms I want to use for this product. And I don't have any other choice. If I was to migrate away from social media or from search, there are no alternative options for me to go to for a safer, more empowered experience where I can design the features of my platform. And so for me, what real change looks like is a plurality of providers where I can make genuine choices about what I want my online experience to be like, and I have an empowered experience where I can design my experience with the platform so that is how I get to experience my digital life. And what that requires is a radical change in the market, and the introduction of new players, and really, again, crack down on existing laws and regulations we have to enable new entrants to come in and take on some of these incumbents.
And also social effects of, if all your friends stay on one platform, it's really hard to feel like you're going to leave and set up shop somewhere else. Andy, I'm curious as well. What's your dream scenario?
I think my dream scenario, and I think we will get there, is where we just resolve this kind of really curious asymmetry we have between these platforms and every other part of the economy, where in every other part of the economy, product safety is a non-negotiable condition to enter a market, and we just don't have that. So I think we need to neutralise that asymmetry, and then we can get to a point where we can actually just see product safety as the the non-negotiable price of access. I think we can get there because this is a generational fight. It's not something that was ever going to be easy or quick. I think before we get there, and for advertisers in the room, I would say the stakes now are very high. It's very clear that parental and public views around online safety have snapped. So, if we then see politicians promising the earth, and that doesn't translate into meaningful change, then I think we're going to see a very febrile environment. And I would say then the risk premium for advertisers not taking online safety issues seriously goes through the roof.
Cosima, and then Jake, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I would say, for me, from my perspective, that ideally you would see the involvement of, I'm speaking from like a youth safety position, but I so see the adult end of it too, is the inclusion of young people, but also broader like adult stakeholders in the design and governance of these products and services. I bring young people into rooms of power every week. I spoke at the G7 and helped write the declaration on tech the other week, and we got America, of all people, we got them to sign. There's an agreement, and as much as it's like a soft agreement because there's no binding obligations, how the fact that they got to hear directly from the mouth of a young person who had lived it, I was told, helped push them, because you can't ignore it. When you're hearing from someone saying, please help me, it's harder to get away from it and do nothing. And at the same time, when we're legislating over issues that impact whoever's lives, like, you've got to talk to the person experiencing the problem. And I think it creates better regulation, and then it creates a better experience. So I would say, like, meaningful participation of young people in these spaces of power across the ecosystem is really, really important. It works. It's really not that hard to do. It's not expensive because they don't really get paid, so it's possible. And then at the same time, I'd also say that this is ultimately a borderless issue. We need global action on this. We're seeing such momentum at the moment. We might not all agree on like the means or whatever, but we agree on the end. We all want a safer online environment, whatever online looks like in 5-10 years. And so I'd say we need to see global coherence. We've got like the beginnings of that happening. There's in the US, in the EU, in Australia, wherever, we're seeing lots of action being taken. If we can bring all that together and try and get some kind of meaningful coherence, the platforms want to comply with that because it makes it cheaper for them. They're not dealing with all these different contexts. If we can make it a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom, then you've got some real movement. So that's what I'd like to see.
Jay?
I'd like to pick up on that race to the bottom, because at the moment I think that's where we are going. I think that the next sort of era of bottom feeding is AI slop on these social media platforms that, you know, Samira again was talking about 3,500 pieces of content just for one brand. You know, I've heard many people talk about personalization at scale within this industry, that, you know, what we need hundreds of thousands of pieces of content created by AI, served to who? By machines, served probably to AI bots. AI slop served to AI bots, served by AI machine learning in media planning. So I think we are currently on that race to the bottom. What I'd personally like to see is a complete rethink of the design functions of all of the online platforms, and have, as Cosima said, you know, designed and governance by stakeholders that this affect, not just tech billionaires, including, you know, different sorts of communities, including people that are experts in addiction as well. You know, those to design products that are not addictive, where you get quality content, should you choose to do so, and you consume that. I would also love personally to see a rebalancing and a return to, in real life, back, you know, nature, community, you know, creativity, and all the good shit that humans should be doing, rather than doom scrolling permanently.
More third spaces perhaps to facilitate that.
Yeah.
We're out of time, but this has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I just want to end, you know, the question was, who cares about safety? Everyone in this room cares deeply about safety. The emotional responses that you've all given, and that I'm sure many in the office, many in the audience were feeling in response to this conversation, I think that should be bottled and continued and discussed further, perhaps at the pub. But I will leave that for Brian to conclude. But thank you so much for being here.